Hey. Hi, Tony. Chris Solari, Detroit Free Press. Just, obviously we're at a different point now than we were when you took over the job. In the infancy of the CSC, how have you seen that evolving and developing? And I'm wondering, from a state standpoint, in developing that, how much is your relationship built with Jay Batt at that point?
Yeah, well, thank you for being here. First, what I'll say is, Jay's done a great job. He's already contributing a lot in our, given so much that's going on. Our athletic directors meet on a weekly basis, and Jay's been participating. Obviously, he's very experienced coming from tech, so he's really well regarded in the room. So on that piece, the second piece of your question about the CSC, what I'll say is, really is an incredible collaboration among the four conferences. And I was fortunate. I worked with Brian Sealy when I was at MLB, where he was leading investigations there. So I have good experience working with Brian. I've seen him, even though that area didn't report directly to me at MLB. So he's in a really challenging spot. In a perfect world, the sale never would come a little sooner, and we would have had more time to run up there. So that's he's in a lot of ways he's building a startup. At the same time, coaches, student athletes, their representatives, our administrators, they need to understand the rules to start to operate. So he's operating it as he's building it, and so I just really applaud the efforts of the four leagues, the general councils, the NCAA contributes as well. It's an ongoing process. I mean, literally before I came over here today, we were on for 90 minutes with Brian. And so that's happening on a regular basis so that we can help him get the experience, because he's doing two really important things. Just building a startup alone takes a lot of time. You hire up people and all that. And I think people have to just respect the process. Like, look, I know there's been some things that have been reported about the speed of deals and how things get cleared. Like, part of this is we want these deals to be scrutinized. Like, all of the participants in the system, want deals to be looked at fairly, and so that takes some time when you're doing it for the first time. But I think Deloitte and then setting up with the cap system, I think we feel really good, and it's only going to improve over time. So I think we have the right people. We have an incredible amount of resources that the conferences are putting in, both in terms of resources and people to support Brian. So I just think a little bit of patience, but in fairness to coaches, you have to, they're doing this in real time. So of course they want answers quickly. Of course they want to know what the rules are, but it will take a little time. And I'm very confident that we're off to a good start, and it will get better.
And as a follow to that, I'm wondering how much you guys built in wiggle room based on potential legal challenges to some of those things, just because it is so new, because basically you're trying to come up from zero.
Well, the system's built to have its own adjudication process through arbitration, so there really shouldn't be challenges outside the system. And plaintiffs' lawyers have an opportunity to weigh in on some of the rules that we're making. So there's that system. So you make a rule, it does take time to have that process work through. But once we're set, the system is built to really work through arbitration. Why are you wearing a Bears hat? Aren't you a Detroit guy? There you go. Oh yeah, wait, that's the one. I should know that from baseball. It looks like the
old school logo.
Yeah, it is old school.
I got a couple old school logos like that.
I know, I saw every possible baseball hat in my 12 years there. I haven't seen that one. Anyway. Questions?
Tony, obviously a lot of continued talk and speculation about NCAA tournament expansion, reports that a 76-team field is maybe where sites are set at the moment. Where do you stand on that, and is any movement from the Big Ten side of things on tournament expansion moving forward?
Yeah, I think we've been supportive. I think there's a couple of pieces of it. The first is when something like that gets talked about, I think our process is we want to know what our coaches think, and we want to know what the ADs think. So when we sit back, anything that I do in the conference office is to represent the relevant groups depending on the topic. And so we talk to coaches. And clearly, I think part of the motivation from the NCAA is a recognition that with these larger conferences, you're going to force teams to more, closer to 500 records in a conference, and what access do they have? And so I think that overall, with the system we have now with these large conferences, more access is better. That's the first piece. So we're very supportive of that. I think it's, obviously there's the economic piece that the NCAA runs. We don't do that directly. The second piece of it is, once you expand the field, what are you doing in terms of how you seed it? What's the right way to absorb those additional teams, right? Are we straight seeding? Who plays in the play-in rounds? And so I think we have some opinions that might be slightly different. I think, obviously, we're biased. We think our teams will be seeded higher as the field goes in. But I understand, there's a system we have now. It'll probably continue, is my understanding. So you weigh all of it and you say, okay, maybe the seating isn't perfect in the way we would design it, but it still is providing more access. So I think we tilt to the side that access is important. And I just believe as many teams competing for as long as possible for the right reward is the best place to be. So we're generally supportive.
How would you design seating?
I mean, I'd like it just to be straight seating right across, and the teams that are in the early games are the teams that are seated. But I understand why that might impact the value of what's happening for for a broadcast partner, CBS and WBD. Like they may feel differently about that, and that's up to Dan Gavitt. I think there's a lot of trust among the coaches and administrators in Dan to make sure he's done a great job with the tournament. So I think there's a lot of faith in what he does.
Tony, it's been reported that the conference is exploring some options in private equity and that kind of investment. When you do look at different sources of revenue generation, whether it's private equity, something else, to what extent do you bring your television partners, kind of in on that, and I don't know if the word is collaborative, but at least make them sort of feel like they are maybe in the room in those discussions?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's been reported that we're considering looking at sort of modernizing the conference and potentially doing some things differently, and whether or not we decide to take to a strategic investment in doing that is what we're considering, with the goal of continuing to grow opportunities for student athletes and all of that. Look, we've got really valuable partners. I think in this particular instance, there are many times when we talk to our TV partners. Like, I think this is an area where there's awareness, but it's not like really in this sort of structure that we're talking about. It's not really necessary to have ongoing conversations. Like if we're going to do something different, we're going to respect everything we've set up in our current deals. Like there's nothing being contemplated that would change anything in our current media relationships. Some of them roll off at different times, and so there's really no contemplation of doing anything different. This project, if we decide to do it, doesn't require any changes to our media structure at all.
Tony, Nick Schultz at On3, kind of on that same line. What kind of role, if any, do you see like private capital, private equity in college athletics going forward?
Look, I look at it more broadly than that. What I would say is, the responsibility in the office that I feel as a commissioner is to maximize the resources for our member institutions. We're among the highest sports sponsorship league in the country. We have basically the most student athletes given the size of the league and the fact that we have 28 championships. And we have many institutions that sponsor more than the 28 championships that we sponsor. So I think in a world that's changing like it has with the settlement and revenue share, the obligation in the conference office is to make sure that we're resourcing properly. And that largely has been media deals, sponsorship, all of those things. So setting up a structure that can maximize that activity is important. Whether or not we need a strategic investment to help us, we'll determine. But it'll be done by all 18 leaders, and I think it's no different than looking at the other buckets that we have to maximize resources. Just one other avenue that may or may not be available to us. Thank you.
But there are now two competing, I guess you'd call them, congressional actions that are being considered to change the way college athletics are done. Where does the conference stand on those two? Do you support one, not the other? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, we've spent, I would say, virtually all of our time supporting the SCORE Act and going down and making our staff available to members of Congress. I've been down, I think since I've gotten the job, I think I'm north of 15 times to DC, and I've been fortunate that members of Congress give us time when we go down there to talk about it. There's a lot of members that are spending a lot of time on college athletics, which we greatly appreciate, and those conversations continue. I think, like our position, the SCORE Act does a lot of what we need, which is basically enshrining the settlement. I think there was a moment that changed. When I first started going down, when I got the job, before settlement, it felt like we were kind of asking for more help. I think once we decided to settle, we set up this model where we're rev sharing and there's still NIL, providing all these benefits. I think it changed the tone, in terms of like, we're not really asking, we're looking. You asked us to change, you expected us to modernize our system. The settlement does that. We'd like to protect it so that we can actually operate it. It doesn't mean it won't get tweaked over time, but we'd like the opportunity to actually operate this new system. The SCORE Act does all of those things. And I think that's a really important piece. I guess it's the recent act that I think Senator Cantwell proposed. We still haven't spent a lot of time on. I'm assuming, like most things, there's elements there that make a lot of sense. There might not be, everything in that bill that lines up with what we're currently thinking. But we feel like the SCORE Act is enough. We're trying to make sure that we're asking for a pretty limited ask in Congress. You know, it's largely around enshrining the settlement for as long as possible. The ability to make some rules so we understand what eligibility is. All of those things are important to protect it, and I think it's because we've modernized it. I think it's changed the nature of the ask. So I think we feel like we have momentum, and we'll just keep pushing because then I think you'll find, you know, virtually unanimity in the space that the SCORE Act can do a lot of things that we need to take this new system and protect it and actually operate it before it gets challenged all over the place.
You can go first.
Thank you.
You go first.
Tony, last year was the first year of having the 4 Western teams in the Big Ten, all the different media partners. Did the league take anything from last season to construct the men's basketball schedule to make sure that TV's get what it wants, but also you're not putting anybody that ain't competitive?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would say that you probably still need even a second season of understanding like what the schedule and how it actually operates. I think one of the things, you know, I think I learned this from like sort of 2 halves of the career I had. Like on the broadcast side, I was sort of like TV guy pushing for scheduling that worked for TV. You think the TV guy wouldn't go near them. So, you know,
so that's what it was?
Yeah. So, you know, basically making sure that, you know, we respect the broadcast process to make sure we're maximizing audiences, which is in the interest of all of our schools. But secondly, I think our travel and the way we're configured just requires us to constantly study what happens. I think after this season, we've talked about inside the league with our coaches, continuing to bring more resources to scheduling. There's so much technology now, it's a place where AI can really help you. I think the way you think about it is, you know, how many factors are you including in your schedule? Like what do you need? Like how much time in between games when you're on the road? Those are things that coaches help us decide, but then there's the other piece of it, which is, you know, what's the best competitive balance? So what have we learned? Like, you know, you should be studying the records and the performance. What happens when teams go in either direction? How do they perform? Like, are we seeing a trend where it's become more difficult to win with a certain time slot? Like, that's on us to figure that out. The sample size isn't big enough yet after 1 season. I think this year will help us, but I've always been a believer that, like a scheduling thing, I always use the word, it's a living thing. We should be constantly evaluating it across. Whether or not we have West Coast teams, we should be doing that, right? The West Coast has just added some other factors that we should consider how teams perform when they travel.
Yeah, with the Big Ten tournament now expanding to 18 teams, how much are you looking forward to that? And what ultimately led to the final decision to eventually expand it to let everybody in?
Yeah, that's. I would say it's just talking with our coaches. We try to do a good job of bringing our coaching groups together to sort of get their opinion. I think they felt pretty strongly last year that everybody should have an opportunity to go. They thought that was the best position. Like part of it also, when you think about how you position your conference tournament, is what impact does it have on how you qualify for the NCAA? You know, so how are you handling the top seeds in your league? What are you asking them to do? And then are you providing opportunities? I think there might have been 1 or 2 teams last year who felt that they were here and got on a run. They may have increased their chances to go to the bubble and maybe get in. I think when you expand the field, that'll be relevant also, like to have more. So I think that was the part. You know, we really felt that the coaches felt strongly. Our athletics directors, you know, agreed to let the coaches, you know, opinion really carry the day. And so we did it one way last year, but now we'll be all comers this year. You know, we'll evaluate it after, but really it was driven by our coaches.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
Having already come to this bench, within the revenue sharing model, have you considered sport-specific caps? Is that something that as coaches or administrators run through?
Yeah, we haven't. I mean, I'll say, and it might be, I'm not, I want to make sure I don't address the legal aspect of like whether you can actually do that. I think, you know, we talked about in the league, you know, how you structure these payments. I think where we ended up in the Big Ten, and I think probably others, I don't want to speak for other conferences, that we didn't decide to have like minimums or allocations, partly because we really feel like this should be local decision making. So if you really think about the decision tree, the first thing is, you know, does an institution get to the cap, right? Because it's not mandatory to get to the top. So that's the first thing. Secondly, what sports does the institution want to support, right? What athletes get something? How many scholarships do you want to have? Do you get to the roster limits, right? How do you run it? I think the best place to be is locally. Now, another thing that's interesting about the Big Ten, when you think about it on the men's side, there's not like a clear third sport in our league, right? Because if you're sitting in certain places, it could be wrestling. In certain places, it could be hockey. You know, if you're out in the west, it might be rowing, right? So it's a very different configuration of the league. And so I think when you start thinking about like how do you allocate? We talked about it initially, like when this first happened. We had all the ADs in the room. It's like, hey, what should we think about this? How do we support that? And the answer is like, we're going to let you run your programs. You know, we got schools that have 36 sports, and we have some that are in the low 20s. And so letting them make that decision we thought is best, and let them manage what they do, because it's not all the same. On the women's side, probably, it's clearer with basketball and volleyball and the supports, and we see it across. But it was really like, after a lot of discussion, the collective, pretty much unanimous consensus was, hey, you guys manage your stuff locally. We'll support you in the conference office. You make these decisions locally.
Tony, it seems like there's been a pretty consistent legal challenges to eligibility. The 5-year clock, 4 seasons of competition. I guess, does the Big Ten have a position on the future of eligibility? And I've been talking about 5 to play 5, things like that. Does the Big Ten have a stance on that?
I mean, look, coaches are. There were things done like prior to this system about playing 4 games, redshirting after 4, that were done probably like when you layer in rev share on top. So a decision that may have been made about a structure of redshirting 3, 4, 5 years ago, right? That may be motivated by player development. Now when you layer rev share on top of it, maybe that system doesn't work as well. And so I think that, like, to say, like, we really want to do a lot of work on 5 for 5 as a league. We need our colleagues to want to do the same thing. So it's going to take time, and it's unfortunately it's being done. When you do that work, you're doing it with a lot of eligibility bases all around the country. Some being upheld, some not. I think the waiver process complicates a lot of things. So we have to do a lot more work there across. But I do think the recognition is at the beginning is like, what does this system require you to change? Because it's very different than what it was when the 4-game. I'm just speaking towards football right now, which is not what we're here to talk about. But that's like it's right on top of us, right? And so what's been happening? And that's why coaches are talking about a change, because they're seeing the impact of a 4-game redshirt with the compensation system, right? And so I think that's part of the challenge, like that hopefully we'll get better at, is understanding like what things that we created in the past can't be pushed forward anymore because of the environment.
I wanted to bring something up that we mentioned first. I want to ask about the tip-off and kickoff times with TV, particularly the east to west, west to east. Michigan State played a 11 p.m. Eastern time kickoff. Now they got UCLA coming back and playing 9 a.m. kickoff this week. I'm wondering how much conversation is being had with TV partners to try and mitigate that. And the second question, off of what you mentioned, the broad-based programming within the Big Ten now, the sports numbers requirements, is that something that could change now in this model?
Yeah. So the first part, there are guardrails about how many times we ask teams to do the 2 examples of what you talked about in terms of like the impact of that. It's a necessary thing. Like, look, we kind of move through the day, on our schedule from like what Fox has built at big noon, going into that CBS window in the late afternoon, and then going into prime mostly with with NBC, and then you have BTN throughout the day. Again, it gets back to the question I was asked before about looking at the metrics, like what's happening to the success rate. Again, not a lot of data yet, but look, I do hear from coaches about it. They want to weigh in about like, hey, when we play, and our body clocks and all those things are important. And so this is what I mean about bringing more firepower to our scheduling, so that we can actually look at more metrics when we build schedules. Create more schedules more quickly. Decide what factors are more important. And those types of things. How often you're asked to do that. How many times you play a team coming off a bye. I just think overall we're putting a lot of resources, and it'll be the same for basketball, like getting better at that. And I think our configuration requires us to put more resources into that. So I just say we're learning from it. And then obviously you're balancing your media partners who are really important in terms of the source of revenue that we get. So we've got to be respectful of that. But it's it's part of a unique challenge in the Big Ten based on the expansion of it.
The second part about
which was what?
The broad-based,
Yeah.
the sports requirement numbers to be a member of the Big Ten. Is that something that could
we have
change?
different things across. No, I think like what we've been really consistent about, and what you've seen from our institutions is I can tell you scholarships are up since the settlement, significantly for women athletes in the Big Ten. I expect that, we have a good chance for that to continue to grow. So, you know, I think at its heart, the thing that the Big Ten is going to be a high sports sponsorship league, and that's what our ADs are committed to. That's what our presidents are committed to. That's what we want to do. Is continue to maintain. That's why we're constantly looking at ways where we can provide more resources, because that is a fundamental part of what the Big Ten is.
We got time for one more because we got our coach rotation.
I actually wanted to follow up on that. I don't know how widespread the support for this is, but I've heard there is some suggestion that moving forward, the 2.5 million, that essentially adding scholarships could be removed from the revenue share cap, or at least that there is some support for exploring that. The idea being that departments would be able to push more scholarship dollars to non-revenue sports while preserving maybe some of those revenue dollars for revenue sports. Is that something that you think has legs or possibility?
Yeah, without giving an indication, I think it's too early to get an indication of how that would go. I will say you are accurate that we are discussing that, and then what would that unlock if that was a change we made to the settlement. It is part of the settlement. It is not a simple process to make a change like that right now, especially because the settlement is just a few months old. But there is a lot of talk about what's the best way to be structured. Look, in fairness to everybody, when you're making decisions about all of this, we were doing it in real time. Then what happens is practitioners come in and they start to operate, and then things become more obvious that maybe when attorneys and all of us were trying to build a system we didn't quite have line of sight to. I think this is one area that we've kind of seen. I think the sentiment is changing. Now the question is like, okay, how do we build consensus? Is it the right change, and when? Right? And so I think there'll be more to come on.